Before the Sky Broke. Book 1 of the Divided Collapse series by B.R. PAULSON. Before the Sky Broke. The world hasn't ended yet, but the cracks are starting to show. Caleb Morgan has spent the past year training under the watchful eye of his off-grid father. Hunting, fencing, water systems, solar backups. He's learning everything, except how to stop thinking about the people he left behind, especially Evie. Back in Missouri, Annie is juggling 4-H, softball, and keeping peace between her mom and her too silent stepdad. She hasn't heard from Caleb in months, and she tells herself that's fine. She doesn't need him. Evie is working nights at a care center and missing someone she pretends she's over. She thought Caleb would come back eventually, but maybe the ones who leave don't come back at all. And while they try to live their lives, gas prices spike, power outages roll through rural towns, rumors spread of coordinated supply chain attacks, and militia recruitment signs show up at high schools. No one's panicking yet, but the sky is already starting to break. Chapter. First, Caleb. Northern Idaho, March. The rabbit froze mid-hop, its dark eyes catching the morning light, filtering through the pine canopy. Caleb Morgan held his breath, feeling the familiar weight of the .22 rifle against his shoulder. 20 yards. Clean shot. The kind his father had been drilling into him for the past 11 months. Breathe in, breathe out. Squeeze. The sharp crack echoed through the hills, sending a scatter of birds into the gray sky. The rabbit dropped, twitching once before going still.
Not bad.
His father's voice carried no praise, just acknowledgement. Frank Morgan emerged from behind a cluster of lodgepole pines, his weathered face unreadable.
But you hesitated.
Caleb lowered the rifle, swallowing the familiar taste of disappointment.
I didn't hesitate. 3 seconds. In a real situation, 3 seconds gets you killed.
Frank kicked at a patch of snow that hadn't yet surrendered to spring.
Or get someone else killed.
The weight of those words settled between them like it always did, heavy and unforgiving. Caleb trudged through the wet undergrowth to retrieve the rabbit, its warm body still soft in his hands. 11 months of this. 11 months of not good enough, and you're not ready, and the world's going to eat you alive, boy. Sometimes Caleb wondered if his father was hoping for exactly that.
Check the perimeter,
Frank said, already turning away.
Then field dress it. Meet me back at the cabin.
Alone among the trees, Caleb let his shoulders drop. The silence here was different from home. Not the comfortable quiet of a Saturday morning in Missouri, but something heavier, watchful, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to go wrong. He thought about Annie, probably still asleep in her bed back home. Thought about how she'd scrunch her nose at the blood on his hands, the way she always did when Dad brought home a deer. Thought about how she'd stopped answering his texts 3 months ago, and how their mom had stopped asking when he was coming home for a visit. And then, unbidden, he thought about Meredith. About the way she'd handled the skinning knife yesterday when they'd dressed the deer Frank had taken. Her movements sure and practiced. About how she'd smiled when she caught him watching her, blood on her hands and not a trace of squeamishness in her dark eyes. She understood this world in ways that Evie never could, never would. Focus. Frank's voice echoed in his head even when the man wasn't around. Stop thinking about what you left behind. Start thinking about what's coming. But what was coming? His father talked in riddles and half-truths, stockpiling supplies like the world was ending while everyone else went about their normal lives. Gas prices were climbing, sure. The news talked about supply chain issues and rolling blackouts in California. But those were just problems. Normal problems that normal people dealt with, weren't they? Caleb secured the rabbit to his pack and started the half-mile hike back to the cabin. The trail wound through dense forest, past his father's carefully concealed game cameras, and the first of 3 perimeter alarms he'd installed last fall. Everything had a purpose here. Everything was a test. The cabin sat in a small clearing, solar panels glinting on the south-facing roof. Smoke curled from the chimney. Frank believed in redundant heating sources, redundant everything. The generator shed, the root cellar carved into the hillside, the workshop with its carefully organized tools, and the locked gun safe that Caleb wasn't allowed to access without supervision. When the world falls apart, Frank always said, the prepared survive. Everyone else becomes a casualty. Caleb had stopped asking what exactly his father thought was going to fall apart. He found Frank bent over the ham radio in the corner of the main room, pencil scratching notes onto a yellow pad. The radio crackled with voices, some clear, others distorted by distance and interference. Frank held up a hand for silence, his expression focused.
Freight delays out of Long Beach extending into next week.
National Guard deployment to Seattle, something about civil unrest.
Recommend avoiding I-5 corridors through Portland if possible.
Frank clicked off the radio and turned.
What did you learn out there?
The question always came. Every hunt, every training exercise, every mundane task somehow became a lesson in survival. Caleb set down his pack and began laying out the field dressing supplies on the kitchen table.
Rabbit was alone. No Warren nearby that I could see. Snow's melting faster on the south slopes, but there's still ice under the tree cover.
He paused, searching his father's face for approval.
And there were tire tracks on the old logging road. Fresh ones.
Frank's eyebrows lifted slightly.
How fresh?
Yesterday, maybe the day before. Wide wheelbase, probably a truck. Deep treads, like they were carrying weight.
Good.
Frank moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains.
Anyone shows up here, you let me handle it. Understood?
Caleb's hand stilled on the rabbit.
Dad, what's going on? You've been different lately. More paranoid.
Not paranoid. Prepared.
Frank turned back to him, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Fear, maybe, or resignation.
The signs are all there, Caleb. You just have to know how to read them.
What signs?
Frank gestured toward the radio.
Infrastructure failures, supply shortages, social unrest, government spending more time managing information than solving problems.
He moved to the gun safe, spinning the combination lock.
Your generation thinks the internet will save you, that someone else will always fix what's broken. But systems fail, son. And when they do...
He opened the safe, revealing the neat rows of rifles and handguns, boxes of ammunition stacked like building blocks. Caleb had seen it before, but something about the way his father looked at the weapons now made his skin crawl.
When they do,
Frank continued,
the strong take from the weak, the prepared take from the unprepared, and the ones who saw it coming.
He selected a Glock from the top shelf, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency.
They're the ones who survive to rebuild.
The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Caleb didn't want to understand. His phone, the one that barely got signal up here, buzzed against his thigh. Without thinking, he pulled it out. A text from his buddy Marcus. Dude, you see the news about that factory explosion in Ohio? They're saying it was an accident, but... A message from Meredith. Dad heard chatter on the radio about supply convoys being hit near Spokane. You and Frank staying alert up there? And buried beneath those, a 3-day-old message from Annie. Mom's being weird about money again. Says we might have to dip into the college fund. Everything okay up there? Caleb stared at the screen, his sister's words blurring together. The college fund. Their mom was worried about money. And here he was learning to gut rabbits and read tire tracks like the world was ending. Here he was falling for a girl who talked about grid failures and economic collapse, the way other girls talked about movies and celebrities. Meredith understood what was coming. She'd been raised by a father who saw the signs, just like Frank. When she looked at Caleb, she didn't see someone playing at being tough. She saw a man learning to survive, Learning to protect the people he cared about. Maybe it was,
Put it away.
Frank said quietly.
Those people can't help you where we're going.
Where are we going?
His father was quiet for a long moment, the Glock heavy in his hands. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like whispered warnings.
Nowhere, if we're lucky.
Frank finally said.
But if I'm right about what's coming,
He slid the gun back into the safe, but left it unlocked.
you'll understand soon enough.
Caleb looked down at the rabbit on the table, its glassy eyes reflecting the cabin's overhead light. Such a small thing, really. Such a simple thing to take a life. To end something that had been breathing and running and alive just an hour ago. He thought about Annie again, and his stomach clenched with something that might have been guilt, or fear, or homesickness. He thought about his mom making pancakes on Saturday mornings, and the way the light felt her sear. Der chantron undergardash and sabradia, tisarit sakarchachiki sana asan nesashir kamashir. Dove back home. Normal things, safe things, things that felt suddenly, terrifyingly fragile. Frank was watching him again, reading his face like a weather report.
You're thinking about them.
It wasn't a question,
They're my family, too.
Caleb said.
And what are you going to do when you can't protect them from 2,500 miles away?
Frank's expression softened slightly.
That's why you need to focus on what's here, on what's real. Meredith understands that. She gets what's at stake.
The mention of her name sent a familiar warmth through Caleb's chest, followed immediately by a stab of guilt. Because even as he cared about Meredith, really cared about her, there was still a part of him that belonged to someone else. Someone who would never understand this world, who would think he'd lost his mind if she could see him now. The question hit like a punch to the chest. Caleb opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Because his father was right, wasn't he? If something did happen, if the world really did fall apart the way Frank kept predicting, what good would he be to anyone from up here?
Finish the rabbit.
Frank said, moving toward the door.
Then we'll work on long-range shooting. There's a storm coming in tonight, and tomorrow we're going to have a visitor.
A visitor?
Frank paused, his hand on the door handle.
Someone's been watching the cabin. Same truck tracks you found, but closer to the house. Tonight they'll probably make their move.
He met Caleb's eyes, and this time there was no mistaking the fear there.
Time to find out if all this training was worth anything.
The door closed behind him, leaving Caleb alone with the dead rabbit, and the terrible understanding that his father might not be as paranoid as he'd thought. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like restless fingers. And somewhere in the distance, almost too faint to hear, came the sound of an engine. Caleb reached for his knife and began to cut. Chapter the Dusra. Annie. Missouri, same day. Annie Morgan stared at the spreadsheet on her laptop screen, the numbers blurring together like they were mocking her. College applications, financial aid forms, merit scholarship deadlines. Everything she'd been working toward for the past 4 years, laid out in neat little rows that suddenly felt as fragile as tissue paper. Her phone buzzed against the kitchen table. Another text from her friend Jess about prom dress shopping, as if the world hadn't shifted sideways sometime in the last few weeks when Mom started getting those worried lines around her eyes and speaking in hushed tones on the phone. Annie minimized the spreadsheet and pulled up her bank account instead. The number staring back at her made her stomach clench. $3,412. 4 years of babysitting, working concession stands at football games, and birthday money carefully hoarded. It had seemed like so much when she'd started. Now it felt like pocket change against the tsunami of college expenses looming ahead. If she even got to go to college. The front door slammed, and Annie quickly closed the laptop. Mom appeared in the kitchen doorway, grocery bags hanging from her arms like anchors. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually perfect hair hung limp around her shoulders.
How was work?
Annie asked, getting up to help with the bags.
Fine.
The word came out clipped, automatic. Mom set the bags on the counter with more force than necessary.
Did you finish your homework?
It's Saturday, Mom.
Right.
Mom pressed her fingers to her temples.
Sorry, there's a lot going on right now.
Annie began unpacking groceries, noting the generic brands where there used to be name brands, the absence of the little luxuries that had always appeared in their cart without thought. No fancy yogurt, no expensive shampoo. Even the bread was the store brand now.
Mom,
Annie's voice came out smaller than she intended.
are we okay? Financially, I mean?
Her mother's hands stilled on a can of soup. For a moment, Annie thought she might deflect again, change the subject the way she had every time Annie tried to bring up the college fund, or the strange phone calls, or the way Mom had started clipping coupons like their grandmother used to do.
We're managing.
Mom said finally.
There have been some changes at work, budget cuts. But we're fine, Annie. Don't worry about it.
But Annie was worrying about it. Had been worrying about it since she'd overheard Mom on the phone with the bank 2 weeks ago, voice tight with stress as she talked about refinancing and interest rates and words that sounded scary, even when Annie didn't fully understand them.
What about my college fund?
The question hung in the air between them. Mom's shoulders sagged, and for the first time in weeks, she looked directly at Annie.
We might need to adjust some plans.
The words hit like a physical blow. Annie gripped the edge of the counter, feeling the world tilt beneath her feet.
Adjust how?
Maybe community college for the first 2 years, transfer after that. It's actually a really smart financial...
No.
The word burst out of Annie before she could stop it.
Mom, no. I worked so hard. My GPA, my SAT scores, the volunteer work. Everything I did was to get into a good school, not to spend 2 years at home taking remedial classes with kids who don't care.
Annie?
Where's the money? What happened to it?
Mom's face crumpled slightly, and Annie immediately felt guilty for pushing, but she couldn't stop herself. This was her future, her life.
Your stepfather's company downsized 6 months ago.
Mom said quietly.
He's been looking for work, but things are tight everywhere. The fund is still there, but we've had to borrow against it, just temporarily, until things get better.
Annie felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest, borrowed against it. Which meant it was probably gone, didn't it? People didn't borrow money they planned to pay back when times were good. They borrowed money when they were desperate.
What about Caleb?
The question slipped out before Annie could think better of it. Mom's expression hardened.
What about him?
Is he coming back? For graduation or...
Annie couldn't finish the question. Because the truth was, she missed her brother desperately. Missed having someone in the house who understood her, who could make her laugh when Mom got stressed about bills and work, and all the adult things that seemed to be falling apart around them.
I don't know what your brother's plans are,
Mom said, her voice carefully neutral.
He's chosen to spend his time with your father instead of here. That's his decision.
The bitterness in her mother's voice was nothing new, but it stung anyway, as if Caleb had abandoned them instead of just trying to figure out who he was, trying to understand the man their mother had divorced when Annie was 12 and Caleb was 15. The man who sent birthday cards with $20 bills and called once a month to ask how school was going, but who had always felt more like a distant uncle than a father. Until last year, when Caleb had surprised everyone by asking to spend a year with Frank. Learning about self-reliance, he'd called it. Annie had thought it sounded like an extended camping trip. Now she wondered if Caleb had seen something coming that the rest of them had missed. Her phone rang, cutting through the tension. Annie glanced at the screen and felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Marcus Chen, calling from school.
Hey.
She answered, grateful for the distraction.
Annie, thank God. Are you watching the news?
No, why?
Annie moved toward the living room, Mom following with a frown.
There was an explosion at some chemical plant in Ohio. They're saying it was an accident, but...
Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper.
My dad works for the EPA, right? He came home early today, and he's been on the phone with his boss for 2 hours. I heard him say something about covering up the extent of the contamination.
Annie's stomach dropped.
What kind of contamination?
I don't know, but they've evacuated like 6 towns. And get this, the company that owns the plant, their stock tanked yesterday, before the explosion.
Mom had moved to the TV, flipping to the news. Images of emergency vehicles and hazmat suits filled the screen. The ticker at the bottom read, Chemical Facility Explosion in Rural Ohio. No injuries reported. No injuries reported. But the reporter looked grim, and there was something in his carefully neutral tone that made Annie's skin crawl.
My dad thinks it's connected to some other stuff that's been happening.
Marcus continued.
Supply chain disruptions, weird economic indicators. He won't say much, but he's been buying extra groceries. Told my mom to fill up both cars and keep them full.
Annie watched the news footage, noting the way officials kept reporters at a distance, the way questions about long-term environmental impact were deflected or ignored.
Marcus, you're starting to sound like a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, maybe. But what if I'm not?
The question lingered after Annie hung up. She stared at the TV screen, at the controlled chaos of emergency response, and felt something shift inside her chest. A nagging sense that the ground beneath her feet wasn't as solid as she'd always believed. Mom muted the TV and turned to face her.
It's probably nothing, honey. These things always look worse on the news than they really are.
But Annie could see the worry in her mother's eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the remote. And for the first time, Annie wondered if maybe Caleb hadn't been running away from his family. Maybe he'd been running towards something that could save them. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Probably just an ambulance heading to the hospital across town. But in the growing darkness of the early spring evening, it sounded like a warning. Annie pulled out her phone and scrolled to Caleb's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment before she set the phone aside. What would she even say? That she was scared? That she missed him? That the world felt like it was coming apart at the seams? And she didn't know who to trust anymore? Instead, she opened her laptop again and stared at the college applications that suddenly seemed like artifacts from a different life. A life where the future was something you could plan for, something you could count on, being there when you arrived. The news droned on in the background, and Annie typed a single line into her scholarship essay. The thing about hope is that it only matters when everything else falls apart. Then she deleted it and started over. Sheprendansha. Chapter Shakmunardai. Evie. Missouri, same night. The fluorescent lights in Pine Manor Care Center buzzed like dying insects, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even the healthiest residents look corpse pale. Evie Donahue pushed her medication cart down the hallway. The squeaky wheel, echoing off the linoleum in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to her life. Third shift. The shift nobody wanted. When the building settled into an uneasy quiet, and the only sounds were the wheeze of oxygen machines and the occasional call bell from someone who couldn't sleep. Evie had volunteered for it 6 months ago, partly because it paid better, but mostly because the darkness outside the windows matched the hollow feeling that had taken up residence in her chest since Caleb left. She knocked softly on room 314 and pushed open the door. Mrs. Patterson sat propped up in bed, her silver hair wild from tossing against the pillow. At 87, she was one of the sharper residents, which made her late-night observations both comforting and unsettling.
Evening, Mrs. P.
Evie said softly, checking the chart.
Time for your blood pressure medication.
Oh, good. The pretty one with the sad eyes.
Mrs. Patterson's voice carried the paper-thin quality of the very old, but her gaze was sharp as she studied Evie's face.
You look tired, dear. More tired than usual.
Evie poured water into a small cup and shook out the pills.
It's almost morning. We're all tired.
No, this is different. This is the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much weight on your heart.
Mrs. Patterson accepted the pills but didn't take them immediately.
You're thinking about that boy again.
Heat crept up Evie's neck. In the 6 months she'd been working here, Mrs. Patterson had somehow extracted more personal information from her than Evie's own mother had in years.
I don't know what you mean.
The one who left. The one you thought might come back.
Mrs. Patterson's eyes softened with something that might have been pity.
The lights go out faster than you think, sweetheart. Don't waste time waiting for someone who's already made their choice.
The words hit harder than they should have. Evie busied herself with the medication cart, trying to shake off the familiar ache that thoughts of Caleb always brought.
He didn't leave me, exactly. We were never... It was just high school.
Love doesn't follow a calendar, dear, and regret doesn't care how old you were when you felt it.
Evie forced a smile.
You should take those pills, Mrs. P. Doctor's orders.
Mrs. Patterson dry swallowed the medication and settled back against her pillows.
The world's changing, you know. Can feel it in my bones. Been through enough to recognize the signs.
She gestured toward the window, where the parking lot lights cast long shadows across the empty spaces.
My Arthur used to say that before the big storms, the animals always knew first. Got restless. Started acting different.
What does that have to do with anything?
People are animals too, sweetheart. Deep down, we know when something's coming. That boy of yours, maybe he didn't leave because he wanted to. Maybe he left because he had to.
Evie's throat tightened.
I should check on Mr. Reynolds.
The lights go out faster than you think.
Mrs. Patterson called softly as Evie reached the door.
Don't wait too long to turn yours back on.
The hallway felt colder as Evie continued her rounds. Mrs. Patterson's words echoed in her head, mixing with the memory of the last real conversation she'd had with Caleb. Standing by his locker after graduation, both of them dancing around words they were too young or too scared to say.
I might go stay with my dad for a while,
He'd said.
learn some things, figure some stuff out.
How long is a while?
She'd asked.
I don't know, maybe a year, maybe longer.
She'd tried to smile, tried to be supportive, but all she could think was that a year might as well be forever when you were 18 and everything felt urgent and immediate.
Will you keep in touch?
The question had felt pathetic even as she asked it.
Of course.
But his eyes had already started to look distant, like he was seeing something she couldn't.
I'll call, text, whatever.
He had, for the first few months, short messages about wilderness training and solar panel installation, and the strange quiet of mountain mornings. But the calls got shorter, the texts more infrequent, until finally they stopped altogether. Like he'd simply faded out of existence, taking all her half-formed dreams of what they might have been with him. Evie finished her rounds and settled at the nurse's station to complete her charting. The building's ancient heating system groaned and wheezed, struggling against the early spring chill that seeped through the windows. She'd heard rumors that the facility was having budget issues, that some of the maintenance had been deferred to save money. Looking around at the peeling paint and flickering lights, she could believe it. Her phone buzzed against the desk. A text from her roommate.
Power keeps flickering at the apartment. Whole block went dark for like 10 minutes. Everything okay there?
Evie glanced around the hallway. The lights here seemed steady enough, but now that she thought about it, the elevator had been acting up all week. And yesterday, the kitchen staff had complained about the freezer cycling on and off randomly. She typed back,
Seems fine here. Probably just grid issues.
but as she hit send, the overhead lights dimmed for a moment before brightening again. In the distance, she could hear the backup generator rumble to life, then click off just as quickly. Mrs. Patterson's words came back to her.
The lights go out faster than you think.
Evie pushed the thought away and focused on her charts. She had 4 hours left on her shift, 6 residents who needed their early morning medications, and a dozen small tasks that would carry her through until daylight. Normal things. Routine things. Things that felt increasingly fragile in a world that seemed to be developing cracks she couldn't quite see. She pulled up Caleb's contact on her phone, thumb hovering over his name like she had 100 times before. What would she say? That she missed him? That she was scared? That sometimes she lay awake wondering if the quiet life she'd built for herself was about to be shattered by forces she couldn't understand or control. Instead, she set the phone aside and returned to her work. Outside, the parking lot lights flickered once, twice, then held steady. For now. At least the pretty one with the sad eyes could hope they'd still be on when morning came. Chapter Non-Gavade. Caleb. Northern Idaho, same night. Caleb's hands moved automatically as he cleaned the .22, muscle memory taking over while his mind wandered to dangerous places. The cabin felt smaller tonight, the walls pressing in with the weight of his father's predictions, and the growing certainty that maybe, just maybe, Frank wasn't as paranoid as Caleb had wanted to believe. The ham radio crackled softly in the corner, Frank's voice mixing with static as he checked in with contacts scattered across the Northwest. Supply shortages in Portland, rolling blackouts in California that weren't weather-related. A chemical plant explosion in Ohio that had accident written all over the official reports, but smelled like something else entirely. Caleb set down the rifle and pulled out his phone, staring at the 3 bars of signal that flickered in and out like a dying heartbeat. 3 missed calls from Annie, 2 voicemails he hadn't listened to yet, because hearing her voice would make the 800 miles between them feel like 8,000. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Evie's name. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment before he set the phone aside. What would he say? That he missed her? That he thought about her every time he saw the sun set over the mountains? But that wasn't fair to Meredith. Wasn't fair to the life he was building here, the future Frank kept talking about. Meredith deserved better than half his heart. She deserved a man who could love her completely, without reservation. The problem was, Caleb wasn't sure he knew how to do that yet.
You're thinking too loud.
Frank's voice cut through the static as he clicked off the radio.
Hear anything interesting while you were wool gathering?
Caleb flushed.
Just cleaning the rifle like you said.
I said a lot of things. Asked you a question, too.
Frank moved to the kitchen window, peering through the gap in the curtains he'd created with 2 fingers.
Vehicle approaching from the south. Headlights off, engine running quiet. Sound carries different at night up here.
The blood in Caleb's veins turned to ice water.
The truck from the logging road?
Most likely.
Frank moved with the calm efficiency that had always unnerved Caleb. No wasted motion, no visible fear. Just a man preparing for something he'd been expecting.
Remember what we practiced. You take the back bedroom, rifle ready, but don't shoot unless I give you the word. These might just be lost folks looking for help.
And if they're not?
Frank's smile was sharp as winter wind.
Then we find out how much you learned this year.
Caleb's hands shook as he checked the rifle's magazine. 11 months of target practice and survival training, but he'd never pointed a weapon at another human being. Never had to look someone in the eye and decide whether they lived or died. The rabbit from this morning seemed like a lifetime ago, its glassy stare a pale comparison to what might be coming.
Dad!
The word came out smaller than he intended.
What if I can't? What if I freeze up?
Frank paused in his preparations, his weathered face softening for just a moment.
Then you remember why you're here. Remember who's depending on you to be strong.
He gestured toward Caleb's phone.
Your sister, your mother, Evie. Everyone you left behind thinking you'd come home a better man.
The weight of it hit Caleb like a physical blow. All those people living their normal lives, planning for futures that might not exist, while he learned to shoot rabbits and read tire tracks and sleep with one ear open. They had no idea what was coming, had no idea that the world they trusted to keep them safe was already showing cracks. The sound of gravel crunching under tires carried through the night air. Frank clicked off the overhead light, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the soft glow of the wood stove.
Remember,
Frank whispered,
they don't know how many people are in here. They don't know what we're armed with. Uncertainty is our advantage.
Caleb crept toward the back bedroom, his bare feet silent on the worn wooden floor. Through the small window, he could see the outline of a pickup truck creeping up the driveway. Headlights dark, but moving with purpose. 2 figures in the cab, maybe more in the bed. His phone buzzed against his leg. A text from Annie. "Are you okay? Something's happening and I keep thinking about you." Another buzz, this one from Meredith. "Dad's moving up the timeline on our supply run to town. Says the signs are getting worse. Be careful tonight." The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, rifle in hand, preparing for heaven knew what, while his little sister on the other side of the country somehow sensed that her big brother was in danger. And here was Meredith, understanding exactly what kind of danger he might be facing, trusting him to handle it. One more buzz. Completely unexpected, not completely unwelcome. From Evie. "Thinking about you tonight. Hope you're safe, wherever you are." Caleb's chest tightened. All 3 of them reaching out on the same night. Annie with her intuition, Meredith with her understanding, Evie with her heart. As if some part of them knew the world was shifting beneath their feet. He wanted to text back, wanted to tell them he loved them, that he was sorry for leaving some behind and not loving others enough, that he hoped they would understand someday why he'd had to choose this path. Instead, he turned off the phone and focused on the truck outside. The engine cut off, leaving behind a silence so complete, Caleb could hear his own heartbeat. Car doors opened and closed with the soft clicks of people trying to be quiet. Footsteps on gravel, moving with deliberate care toward the front of the cabin. Frank's voice carried through the darkness, calm and measured.
"That's far enough, gentlemen. State your business."
A pause. Then a voice from outside, rough with too many cigarettes and not enough sleep.
Just looking for some help, friend. Our truck broke down about 5 miles back. Saw your lights and thought maybe...
"No lights showing from the road."
Frank interrupted.
"Try again."
Another pause, longer this time. Caleb could feel the tension ratcheting up, the moment balanced on a knife's edge between conversation and violence.
Look, we know you got supplies up here.
The voice continued, dropping the pretense of friendliness.
We've been watching. You and your boy, coming and going with your fancy truck, your solar panels, while folks down in town are struggling to keep the lights on.
Caleb's finger found the trigger guard of the rifle. This was it. The moment his father had been preparing him for. The reason for all the training and paranoia and sleepless nights listening to the radio.
You got 2 choices,
The voice continued.
Share what you got, or we take it anyway. You're cool.
Frank's laugh was soft and utterly without humor.
"Son, you have no idea what you're walking into."
The first gunshot shattered the night, followed immediately by the sound of breaking glass. Caleb's world exploded into chaos. Shouting voices, running footsteps, the sharp crack of his father's rifle answering from the front room.
"Now, Caleb,
Frank's voice cut through the noise.
take the shot."
Through the bedroom window, Caleb could see a figure moving toward the back of the cabin, something metallic glinting in his hands. A man who wanted to hurt his father, to take everything they'd worked for, to destroy the fragile safety Frank had built in these mountains. Caleb raised the rifle, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil drove him back against the bedroom wall. Outside, the figure stumbled and fell, his weapon clattering away into the darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Frank's voice, steady and sure.
"You did good, son. Now let's finish this."
But as Caleb stared at the still form outside the window, all he could think about was Annie's text. Something's happening. Yes, he thought, something was happening, and this was just the beginning. Chapter de Perfeindavde. Annie. Missouri, next morning. Annie woke to the sound of her mother crying. It was quiet crying, the kind meant to be hidden, muffled by a pillow or a closed door. But the walls in their house were thin, and Annie had always been a light sleeper. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft, broken sounds coming from her mother's room. The digital clock on her nightstand read 6:47 a.m. Too early for a Sunday. But Annie couldn't go back to sleep now, not with that sound echoing through the house like a funeral dirge. She padded barefoot to the kitchen and started the coffee maker, grateful for the familiar ritual. Measure the grounds. Add the water. Press the button and wait for the machine to gurgle to life. Normal things, safe things. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her friend Jess. "Did you see? They're saying the Ohio thing is way worse than they first reported. My dad heard they might evacuate the whole state." Annie's stomach dropped. She quickly pulled up the news on her phone, scrolling through headlines that made less and less sense the more she read them. Chemical plant. Explosion spreads to neighboring facilities. Midwest supply chains. Disrupted as trucking companies refuse routes. Federal Emergency Management considers regional quarantine. The coffee maker beeped, startling her. Annie poured herself a cup with shaking hands and tried to make sense of what she was reading. How did a single factory explosion turn into this? And why wasn't it the top story on every news site? Half the articles seemed to contradict each other, and the official statements felt like they were written by people who had no idea what was actually happening.
You're up early.
Mom appeared in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. She'd tried to fix her hair and put on makeup, but she couldn't hide the hollow look in her eyes.
Couldn't sleep. Annie held up her phone. Have you seen the news?
Mom glanced at the screen and quickly looked away.
It's probably not as bad as it sounds. You know how the media exaggerates everything.
But there was something in her mother's voice, a brittle quality that suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as Annie.
Mom, what's really going on? And don't say everything's fine because I know it's not.
Her mother poured herself coffee with hands that trembled slightly.
Your stepfather lost his job yesterday.
The words hit Annie like a physical blow.
What? I thought he was just looking for something better.
He was. But the company he's been interviewing with, they had a hiring freeze, budget cuts, and his old company.
Mom's voice cracked.
They're not just downsizing, they're closing, completely.
Annie felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Her stepfather worked for a logistics company. Trucks, shipping, supply chain management. If they were closing completely.
How many people?
Annie asked quietly.
3,000 employees, just in this region.
Mom sat down heavily at the kitchen table.
And it's not just them. I've been on the phone with your Aunt Linda. Her husband's company is talking about layoffs, too. Something about transportation costs and fuel shortages and insurance claims they can't process.
Annie thought about Marcus's phone call the night before, about his father buying extra groceries and telling his mother to keep the cars full of gas, about the way the news seemed to be hiding as much as it was revealing.
Mom!
Annie's voice came out steadier than she felt.
I think we need to call Caleb.
Her mother's expression hardened.
What's your brother going to do? He's 2,500 miles away playing survivalist with your father.
Maybe that's exactly what we need right now.
The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them wanted to face. Because if Annie was right, if Caleb and Frank had been preparing for something like this, then everything they dismissed as paranoia might actually be wisdom. And if they were wrong, if this was all just a series of unfortunate coincidences and media hysteria, then they had nothing to lose by making a phone call.
I tried calling him last night.
Annie admitted.
He didn't answer.
Mom's face softened slightly.
He probably doesn't get good reception up there.
Or something's wrong.
The thought had been gnawing at Annie since she'd sent that text and gotten no response. Caleb always texted back, even if it was just to say he was busy. The silence felt ominous in a way she couldn't explain. Her phone rang, making them both jump. Unknown number, local area code. Annie answered cautiously.
Hello?
Annie, I'm glad I got you. It's Marcus. I'm borrowing my neighbor's phone. Mine died, and the power's been out at our house for like 6 hours.
The power's out?
Annie glanced around their kitchen, noting the steady hum of the refrigerator, the digital displays on the microwave and coffee maker.
Just our block, but it's weird. The power company says it's rolling blackouts to preserve the grid, but my dad thinks it's something else. He came home this morning and started packing, like really packing. Clothes, food, important documents. He won't say where we're going, but he keeps checking his phone and muttering about cascading failures.
Annie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air.
Marcus, you're scaring me.
I'm scared too. But Annie, listen. You guys need to be ready to leave. I don't know when. I don't know where. But my dad keeps saying the cities are going to be the worst places to be if this gets bad.
If what gets bad?
I don't know. But whatever's happening in Ohio, it's not stopping there. My dad has contacts in the government, remember? And he's not the kind of guy who panics. But right now, he's panicking.
The line went dead, leaving Annie staring at her phone in the sudden quiet of the kitchen. Outside, a car drove by with music playing too loud. Normal Sunday morning sounds that felt surreal against the backdrop of her conversation. Mom was watching her with growing alarm.
What did he say?
That we need to be ready to leave.
Annie looked around the kitchen, at the house she'd lived in for 6 years, at all the normal things that suddenly felt as fragile as soap bubbles.
Mom, I think we need to pack.
Pack for what? Where would we go?
Annie thought about her brother, all that distance away in the mountains with their survivalist father, about the solar panels and the root cellar, and all the preparations she'd dismissed as Frank's paranoid hobby.
Idaho, she said quietly. I think we need to go to Idaho.
Her mother opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, because outside, another siren was wailing in the distance, and this time it was joined by another, and another, and for the first time in her life, the sound didn't seem like help coming. It sounded like a warning. Chapter out. Evie. Missouri, same morning. Evie sat in her car in the parking lot of Pine Manor, engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor her to something solid. The morning sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, but she couldn't bring herself to drive home yet. Not after what had happened during her shift. The backup generator had failed completely around 4 a.m. Not just a brief cycling like the night before, but a complete shutdown that left half the facility in darkness for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of confused residents calling out in the dark, of oxygen machines falling silent, of Evie and the skeleton night crew scrambling with flashlights and battery-powered equipment to keep people alive. When the power finally came back, the head nurse had pulled Evie aside with a grim expression.
Corporate's been in emergency meetings all weekend,
She'd said quietly.
There's talk of restructuring, budget cuts. You didn't hear it from me, but you might want to start looking at other options.
Other options. As if jobs for CNAs were growing on trees in a town where 3 major employers had closed in the past 6 months. Evie's phone buzzed in her lap. A text from her roommate, Sarah. Power went out again around 6. Been flickering all morning. Plus, the water pressure is almost nothing. What's going on? She stared at the message, Mrs. Patterson's words from the night before echoing in her head. The lights go out faster than you think. The old woman had lived through the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War. She'd seen systems fail before. She knew what the warning signs looked like. Another text, this one from her mother. Honey, your father thinks we should drive down to see your grandmother in Arkansas this week. Family emergency. Can you get time off work? Family emergency. Her grandmother had been healthy as a horse last time Evie talked to her. And her parents weren't the type to make sudden cross-country trips unless something was seriously wrong. Unless they knew something they weren't telling her. Evie finally started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, but instead of heading home, she found herself driving toward the center of town, past the closed-down factory that had employed half her high school graduating class. Past the gas station where prices had jumped 30 cents overnight. Past the grocery store where the parking lot was unusually full for a Sunday morning. She pulled into the grocery store lot and sat for a moment, watching people emerge with carts piled high with canned goods, bottled water, batteries. Not the usual Sunday shopping. This was something else. something that looked a lot like panic, even if people were trying to hide it behind normal expressions and casual conversation. Her phone rang. Caleb's name on the screen made her heart skip, the way it always did, even after all this time.
Hello?
She tried to keep her voice steady, casual.
Evie,
His voice sounded different, older, strained.
I got your text.
I wasn't sure you'd call back.
She closed her eyes, hating how small and needy she sounded.
I know things have been complicated.
They have.
A pause, and she could hear something in the background. Voices, maybe. Movement.
But I needed to hear your voice, especially today.
Why especially today?
Another pause, longer this time.
Have you been watching the news? The stuff about Ohio? The supply chain disruptions?
Some. It's been hard to avoid.
Evie watched a woman struggle to load cases of water into her SUV.
Marcus Chen's dad has been telling people to stock up on essentials. Why?
Because it's not stopping in Ohio.
Caleb's voice dropped to almost a whisper.
Evie, I need you to listen to me, okay? Really listen. Things are about to get bad. Worse than anyone's saying publicly.
A chill ran down her spine.
What do you mean?
I can't explain everything over the phone, but my dad was right about all of it. The infrastructure failures, the economic indicators, the social unrest. It's all connected, and it's all accelerating.
She could hear him take a shaky breath.
I need you to be prepared.
Prepared for what?
For the possibility that normal life as we know it is about to end.
The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at the grocery store, at the people loading their cars with supplies, and suddenly their behavior didn't look like panic. It looked like survival instinct.
Caleb, you're scaring me.
Good. You should be scared. But you should also be smart.
His voice softened slightly.
I know we haven't talked much lately. I know I hurt you when I left. But I still care about you, Evie. I need you to be safe.
Tears she'd been holding back for months finally spilled over.
I don't know how to be safe. I don't know how to do any of this.
Start small. Get some extra food, water, flashlights, batteries. Fill up your car and keep it full. Have cash on hand.
He paused.
And if things get really bad, if the power stays off, if there's violence, if the government starts talking about martial law, get out of town. Go somewhere rural, somewhere with fewer people.
Where would I go?
Another pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion.
I wish I could tell you to come here. I wish things were different between us. But
they're not.
She finished the sentence for him, her heart breaking all over again.
I understand.
Evie. Her name sounded like a prayer on his lips.
I want you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. And if I could change how things worked out...
Don't.
She couldn't bear to hear him say words that would only make this harder.
Just be safe, okay? Take care of yourself.
You too, and Evie. If you need anything, if things get desperate, my mom still has my dad's number. She could get word to me.
The line went quiet except for the sound of their breathing. Two people who had loved each other, still loved each other, separated by so much distance and choices they couldn't take back.
I should go,
Evie finally whispered.
Yeah, me too.
Another pause.
But Evie, I meant what I said. Be prepared. Be smart. Be safe.
The line went dead, leaving her sitting in her car with tears streaming down her face and the terrible understanding that everything was about to change. She looked at the grocery store again, at the people who were acting on instincts they probably couldn't even name. Mrs. Patterson was right. The animals always knew first. Deep down, people could sense when the storm was coming. Evie wiped her eyes, got out of her car, and went inside to buy supplies she hoped she'd never need. Because the pretty one with the sad eyes was finally ready to turn her lights back on, even if it meant facing the darkness that was coming. Chapter Yeram. Annie/Caleb. Missouri.
The sky looks different tonight.
Annie lay on the hood of her stepdad's truck, staring at the stars. The metal was still warm from the day's sun, but the March air carried a bite that made her pull her jacket tighter. She'd come out here to think, to escape the sound of her mother's muffled phone calls and the oppressive weight of all the things they weren't saying out loud. The stars looked the same as they always had, distant, cold, infinite. But somehow they felt different tonight, like they were witnesses to something momentous happening below, something that would change everything. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jess.
My dad just got called into work. Emergency meeting. Says they might be closing the plant indefinitely.
Another buzz, this one from Marcus.
We're leaving in the morning. Dad won't say where. Annie, I'm really scared.
She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what Caleb was seeing right now, 2,500 miles away in the mountains. Were the same stars shining down on him? Was he lying awake too, feeling like the world was balanced on the edge of a knife?
I was just thinking that.
Northern Idaho, same night. Caleb sat on the cabin's front porch, Frank's rifle across his knees, watching the tree line for movement that might not come. The men they'd fought off 6 hours ago were either dead or gone, but Frank insisted on keeping watch.
Never assume.
He'd said.
Assumptions get you killed.
The stars above the mountains were brilliant, unmarred by city lights or smog. Caleb had grown to love them over the past 11 months, the way they made him feel both small and infinite at the same time. Tonight, though, they felt like eyes. Watching. Waiting. His phone had been buzzing on and off since the attack. Messages from Annie, from Evie, from people back in Missouri who somehow sensed that something was wrong. He'd been ignoring them, but now, in the quiet aftermath of violence, he found himself thinking about his sister. Was she looking at the same sky? Was she as scared as he was? The cabin door creaked open behind him. Frank emerged, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to Caleb and settled into the chair beside him.
How you holding up?
Frank's voice was softer than usual, the harsh edge muted by exhaustion and something that might have been pride.
I killed someone tonight.
The words came out flat, matter of fact. Caleb stared at his hands, noting the way they didn't shake anymore.
I pointed a gun at another human being and I pulled the trigger.
You protected your family, yourself, this place.
Frank sipped his coffee, studying Caleb's profile.
That's what men do when the world gets ugly.
Is that what this is? The world getting ugly?
Frank was quiet for a long moment.
This is the beginning of the world getting honest. About what really matters. About who's prepared and who isn't. About what happens when the thin veneer of civilization gets stripped away.
Caleb thought about Annie's text.
Something's happening and I keep thinking about you.
His little sister, 2,500 miles away, somehow sensing that her brother was in danger. That the world they'd grown up in was ending.
They don't know,
he said quietly.
The people back home. They don't understand what's coming.
No,
Frank agreed.
They don't. And by the time they figure it out, it'll be too late for most of them.
The weight of that statement settled between them. Caleb pulled out his phone and stared at Annie's message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could he tell her? How could he explain that the brother who'd left home to learn wilderness skills had become someone who could take a life without hesitation? That the world she was planning for, college, career, a normal future, might not exist much longer? Instead, he typed,
I'm okay. Stay close to home. Trust your instincts. I love you.
He almost hit send. Almost. But then he thought about Frank's words.
By the time they figure it out, it'll be too late.
Maybe it was already too late. Missouri. Annie's phone buzzed in her hand. For a moment, her heart leaped. Maybe it was Caleb, finally responding to her messages. But it was just another news alert. Ohio evacuation zone. Expands as containment efforts fail. She closed the alert without reading the details. She was tired of trying to piece together what was happening from scattered news reports and official statements that said nothing. Tired of feeling like she was the only one who noticed that nothing made sense anymore. A meteor streaked across the sky, burning bright for a few seconds before disappearing into the darkness. Annie made a wish, the way she had as a child. She wished for Caleb to come home. She wished for her college fund to be real again. She wished for her mom to stop crying, and her stepdad to find work, and for everything to go back to the way it was before. But even as she made the wishes, she knew they wouldn't come true, because somewhere deep in her bones, in the part of her that had always been connected to her brother across any distance, she could feel it. The world was ending, and they were running out of time. Northern Idaho. Caleb deleted the text without sending it. Instead, he stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the mountains that had become his home. Somewhere out there, Meredith was probably asleep in her father's cabin, trusting that the men in her life would keep her safe. Somewhere beyond that, across hundreds of miles of distance and multiple time zones away, Annie was staring at the same stars and feeling the same dread. And somewhere in between, Evie was probably just getting off her shift, driving home through empty streets, finally understanding that the world she'd known was disappearing. 3 women, 3 different kinds of love, 3 futures that depended on choices he wasn't sure he was strong enough to make. An owl hooted in the distance, and Frank stirred in his chair.
You thinking about them again?
Yeah.
Good. That's what'll keep you human when everything else goes to hell.
Frank stood, stretching his back.
But don't let it paralyze you. There's more coming, son. Tonight was just the appetizer.
Caleb nodded, understanding. Tomorrow, he would call Meredith and hear her voice, and remember why he'd chosen this path. Tomorrow, he would help Frank prepare for whatever came next. Tomorrow, he would continue becoming the man this new world required. But tonight, for just a few more minutes, he would think about Annie somewhere back in Missouri, looking up at the same infinite sky, and knowing, the way he knew, that nothing would ever be the same. The stars watched them both, distant and cold and eternal. And for the first time since he'd arrived in Idaho, Caleb wondered if they would both survive long enough to see each other again.
Epilogue. Frank. Northern Idaho, late night.
Frank Morgan sat alone at his kitchen table, the ham radio's green glow casting eerie shadows across his weathered face. The cabin was silent, except for the soft crackle of static and the occasional pop from the dying fire in the wood stove. Caleb had finally gone to sleep an hour ago, exhausted by the night's violence and the weight of taking his first life.
Frank was proud of his son, proud and terrified in equal measure.
He pulled his logbook closer and flipped to a fresh page, the pen heavy in his calloused fingers. The date at the top read March 15th, but Frank crossed it out and wrote March 16th instead. It was well past midnight now. A new day. Maybe the last normal day they'd have.
Entry 847,
he wrote. First contact with hostile civilian population. Caleb performed as trained. No casualties on our side. 2 confirmed KIA, 1 probable. He paused, staring at the words. Such clinical language for what had been chaos and blood and the sick sound of his son's rifle cracking in the darkness. But Frank had learned long ago that survival depended on compartmentalization, on treating emotion as a luxury he couldn't afford. The radio crackled to life, pulling him from his thoughts.
Cascade failure in the Ohio Valley extending into Pennsylvania and West Virginia.
FEMA declaring martial law zones in 7 metropolitan areas.
Supply convoy attacked outside Denver. National Guard casualties.
Frank adjusted the frequency, chasing clearer signals through the static. His contacts across the Northwest had been chattering all night, painting a picture that made his blood run cold. This wasn't random violence or isolated incidents anymore. This was coordinated, Systematic. Someone had lit the fuse, and now they were all watching the explosion spread. He picked up his pen again and continued writing.
Infrastructure collapse, accelerating faster than projected. Power grid failures cascading across multiple states. Supply chains severed. Government response fragmented and ineffective. Timeline moved up. Estimate 48 to 72 hours before total communications breakdown in this region.
Frank paused, his pen hovering over the page. The next words were the hardest ones he'd ever written, but they had to be said, had to be recorded for whoever might find this journal someday.
Caleb is ready. As ready as I could make him in 11 months. But ready for what's coming? I don't know if any of us are ready for what's coming. I think about his sister, his mother, the girl he left behind, 2,500 miles away, and they have no idea. By the time the truth reaches them, it may be too late.
His hand shook slightly as he wrote the final line.
God forgive me for what I've taught him, and God help him use it wisely.
Frank closed the logbook and reached for the radio microphone. He had one more call to make before dawn, one more warning to send into the void, though he doubted anyone would listen.
This is Mountain Base to all stations,
he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper.
Final transmission on this frequency. The dam has broken. Repeat. The dam has broken. Recommend immediate implementation of Protocol 7. Mountain Base going dark.
He clicked off the radio and sat back in his chair, staring out the window at the mountains that had been his refuge for the past decade. Tomorrow, those mountains would become a fortress, and Caleb would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be when the world demanded he choose between survival and his soul. Frank thought about his ex-wife, probably asleep in her suburban home, still believing that normalcy was something she could count on. Thought about Annie, smart and stubborn and completely unprepared for what was coming. Thought about all the people who would wake up tomorrow to discover that the world they'd trusted to protect them had vanished overnight. He'd tried to warn them, in his own way, through his endless preparations and grim predictions and the son he'd trained to be a survivor. But warnings only mattered if people were willing to listen. And most people, Frank had learned, preferred comfortable lies to hard truths. It might not be literally tomorrow, but the tomorrow it was had gotten a whole lot closer than predicted. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like restless spirits. In the distance, barely audible over the sound, came the low rumble of engines. More than one. Moving fast through the darkness toward destinations unknown. Frank smiled grimly and reached for his rifle. The night's first lesson was over. Time for the second one to begin. Also by B.R. Paulson. Digging this book and craving more? Let's kill together. Paulson books have crazy end of the world. Time to find that killer. Stalking chaos that keeps you turning the page long into the night. Survive the pages. Survive Paulson style. Books by B.R. Paulson. 180 Days. And Counting Series. Sadie, her mother, and her daughter must figure out a way to survive a viral apocalypse that Katie couldn't stop. As the world falls down around them, the truth behind who they are, what they want, and what they're willing to do to save the ones they love is revealed. Is the truth a reality they want to live with? Start with Out of Time. Worth of Souls series. The world is ending, and Kelly can't escape the loss, as one by one her family dies to protect her. When she finds the boy she thought she lost, can Kelly forget everything she's lost? Or will her survival rest on what she's willing to do and who she's willing to give up? Cost of Survival will keep you on the edge of your seat. Into the End series. Two sisters face the end of the world as they know it. One may be the cause behind the warfare strategy that takes down the USA. The other does things she's not proud of to save the family she didn't know she wanted. As these sisters face the end, they give up so much of who they are to save the one thing they love more than themselves, each other. Rip through the series with Book 1, Into the End.